Hi everyone, I wanted to make a new dress for Yuna, my PukiFee, since I got some new fabric in recently. This is a relatively simple dress, so I thought I would share the process. For the fabric, I have two rectangles. The smaller one is for the bodice and the larger one is for the skirt. I used some pinking shears to cut these fabric to help prevent fraying. I started off by folding the skirt piece up 1/4 of an inch and realized that the fabric needed to be pressed for it to have any chance of retaining the fold. Straight stitch a little less than 1/4 inch from the fold so that we have a nice hem. I'm not sure why I knot my thread so much in this project, especially when on mini stitches I backstitch to lock the threads. Old habits, I guess. Then I set the skirt aside to work on the bodice. Doing the same thing, we press up 1/4 of an inch and stitch down. Next, I use Yuna as a model to determine where the sleeve should extend from the bodice and mark the attach points. I'm using some trim that I had on hand. I'm sure lace, ribbon, or even bias tape would be great to use as well. I pin down the first point and use Yuna as reference again to make sure I have enough material. Pin down the trim to the bodice at the points marked, and this will also indicate where we will start and stop sewing to effectively create loops for where the arms will go through. I just eyeball it to make sure they look even. Then sew down the trim to the bodice, backstitching at the beginning and end of each segment. I trim my threads as much as possible as I go. My camera's buffer was too full to catch the end of this part, but it's basically the same. We're just creating loops for the arms to go through. Next is sewing the edge of the bodice by folding in 1/4 of an inch and stitching down. Setting your machine to the longest stitch it can do, and on the side that we didn't hem, sew a basting stitch that will allow for gathering of the skirt. Gather the skirt by holding onto one of the tail threads and sliding the fabric towards the center. I alternate between one side and then the other, and even out the gathers in between. The goal is to gather the skirt so that it is about the same length as the bodice. Once that is achieved, pin the bodice and the skirt with presenting sides together and sew a straight stitch to attach the pieces together, which also holds the gathers in place. This is optional, but if your basting threads are visible, use a seam ripper to pull them out. I didn't do a great job on this seam, so I have to do this part. Now would be a good time to press the waist seam up towards the bodice, but I was too tunnel vision towards finishing and skipped this part entirely. Now we sew the back seam of the skirt up enough to allow for the hips to fit through. Backstitch at the start and end of this seam. This is a perfect spring dress for once the weather warms up. We're pretty much done at this point, and now it's just closing the top of the dress based on your preference. I opted to go with sew-in snaps, but you could use whatever closures you feel more comfortable with. I'll work on tweaking my filming setup for my sewing projects in the future, since a lot of the times my hands were in the way. Hopefully next time the angles will be much more helpful. Thanks again for joining me. I hope you have a great one. Bye.